It was afternoon on May 25, 2020, when George Floyd died following his arrest by several police officers in the United States. In the weeks that followed, tensions began to rise across the Atlantic. What some perceive as a problem became increasingly significant, especially with over 1 million migrants having entered Europe in 2022. European countries also faced growing challenges. In 2015, migrants and refugees were seen sleeping under the elevated metro in Paris. Behind these seemingly unrelated events lies a figure who orchestrated these situations, a controversial billionaire. Sometimes hated by the right, and sometimes by the left, labeled as a vulture or even a Jew by some, he is also praised by others as a philanthropist and a modern-day Robin Hood. Rejected by the Hungarian government that raised him, he has been accused of contributing to the migratory crisis in Europe and the rise of Islamism in the West. That's not all, as he also instigated a massive economic crisis in England in 1992, leading to significant poverty. With a fortune estimated at nearly $7 billion, he is among the richest people in the world. However, he stands out from other ultra-wealthy individuals due to his surprising discourse. He claims that the main difference between himself and most other wealthy individuals is his focus on ideas. He states that he doesn't personally need all his wealth, but believes that without his money, no one would care about his ideas. Despite his image as a generous donor, he plays a dangerous game that has far-reaching political and economic consequences. This character remains relatively unknown in France. So, who is really behind this facade of a failed philosopher? What plan is he devising where we least expect it? I investigated, and this is what we will explore in this documentary. The Treaty of Trianon, signed in 1920 after the Treaty of Versailles, marked the end of the Austro-Hungarian state following World War I. The weakened and fragmented Austro-Hungarian Empire crumbled, giving rise to several independent nations. Hungary lost two-thirds of its territory and entered a period of political chaos, alongside significant poverty and vulnerability relative to other nations in Europe. It is within this context that George Soros was born in 1930 to an affluent Jewish family in Budapest. In March 1944, during the war against the Soviet Union, Germany invaded Hungary. Jews in Hungary were then mass deported to concentration and extermination camps. At just 14 years old, George's father managed to secure false identities for the family, allowing them to pose as Christians. In order to avoid detection, George took on the role of a messenger, helping to identify Jews and confiscate their properties. In a 60 Minutes interview in 1998, he was asked whether this experience was traumatic. His response reveals how deeply troubling this time was. It's unsettling to hear a Jewish man forced to pass as a Christian and accept so readily the task of denouncing his peers. Thanks to the protection of a ministry employee and the forged identity papers his father provided, the family went unnoticed and survived the chaos. However, they could not escape the Soviet invasion at the end of 1944, which established a new form of totalitarianism in Hungary, communism. George consequently left the country in 1947 to study at the London School of Economics, where he met philosopher Karl Popper, who would become his spiritual mentor. Popper authored a classic in political philosophy, Open Society and Its Enemies, which greatly influenced Soros. This vision of an open and liberal society would have a lasting impact on him. Inspired to become a philosopher, he ultimately turned to finance to earn a living due to lack of funds. In 1956, at the age of 26, he moved to New York with the hope of making a fortune on Wall Street. Throughout the years, he worked as an analyst and fund manager in small financial firms. In 1969, he opened his first offshore fund, the Quantum Fund, to invest his savings and those of his investors including the renowned Rothschild Bank. By the 1970s, now a banker in New York, Soros founded the Open Society Foundations, a network of charitable organizations aimed at promoting democracy and human rights. While this foundation appears altruistic, it would eventually become a tool for his larger schemes. Soros, eager to live off his ideas, views the finance world as an open system where individuals can influence events. Through his foundation, he has funded multiple generations of students from Eastern Europe who study at prestigious universities in Western Europe, including young Viktor Orban, Hungary's future prime minister and Soros's adversary. During the 1990s, George Soros became a highly controversial figure by executing one of the biggest financial moves of his life. 10 years prior, Europe had launched the European exchange rate mechanism to stabilize currencies. At that time, the British pound was not well positioned. Soros believed the entry rate for the British currency was too high, as was its inflation. He then decided to short sell a massive amount of pound sterling. From the beginning of 1992, he began discreetly unloading pounds in financial markets. The longer this went on, the more the currency collapsed. He borrowed nearly $10 billion to increase his chances of profit. On September 16, 1992, his fund withdrew its positions, generating over $1 billion in profit in less than 24 hours. Suddenly, the British economy crumbled. This maneuver made George Soros internationally renowned for the first time. He soon became known as the one who ruined the Bank of England, viewed as a Wall Street wolf, a cynical manipulator who topples governments from his computer. His reputation as an elusive, cold, and calculating figure began to settle in the public consciousness. Shortly after this incident, he addressed the British Parliament to speak out about the dangers of unregulated free markets. For many, this was the last straw. The individual who profited from deregulation to amass his fortune seemed ill-suited to discuss economic hazards. However, Soros embraced the impact he had on the British economy. He presented himself as a modern Robin Hood, claiming to have ruined the English economy to transfer his profits to the poor democracies of Eastern Europe, countries he believed required better support from Western powers. This opened a new and complex chapter in George Soros's life, his role as a covert philanthropist. On September 17, 2011, thousands of New Yorkers gathered to protest on Wall Street. This was the start of a significant movement, Occupy Wall Street, which would make headlines. Across the globe, from Japan to New York, through Europe and South America, thousands demanded change, true democracy, and condemned the greed of the financial system. Although this movement directly opposed the ultra-wealthy, it surprisingly captivated George Soros, who saw a prime opportunity. During a conference at the Central European University, he presented himself as a philosopher who understood the protesters and suggested that he supported their movement despite the criticisms aimed at him. In 2018, Brett Kavanaugh was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, prompting strong backlash from Democrats. Soros allegedly funded protests against Kavanaugh and was believed to have been involved in efforts to harass certain American lawmakers. His influence is felt across various causes, from combating Islamophobia in France to advocating for cannabis legalization in California. In the following decades, his foundation funded organizations that played roles in the protests following George Floyd's death. While Soros presents himself as a philanthropist, some of his actions raise pertinent questions. This leads to broader inquiries about whether his motives align with the common good, or if he seeks to promote a worldview that matches his interests. In 2017, Soros made an astonishing $18 billion donation to his network of foundations. This amounted to more than 70% of his fortune at the time. While this appears to be a generous gesture, the reality behind this donation is rather troubling. The catalyst for this was a new law enacted in the United States in 2008, which did not sit well with billionaires. Soros faced the prospect of paying $7 billion in taxes by 2017, and understandably, this was too much for him. Rather than paying this sum to the government, which would allocate it as it saw fit, George Soros sought a way to avoid the tax burden. Upon research, the answer became apparent: make a massive donation to charitable organizations to mitigate his tax obligations. Conveniently, his network of associations was already established and required funding to operate in alignment with his ambitions. Just as he did in 1992, when he collapsed the pound sterling and profited by $1 billion, this allowed Soros to circumvent the system to his advantage. After amassing wealth in the United States, he devised financial strategies to minimize taxes there and redistribute his riches elsewhere. Essentially, the individual who claims to support noble causes is simply obscuring his fortune, opposing the capitalist machinery while undermining the Bank of England and causing widespread unemployment. He backs the Democrats, claiming to help those in need, yet he practices tax evasion to the detriment of the most vulnerable. A 2004 article in the Los Angeles Times titled, "George Soros, the God with Dangerous Demons," captures part of his persona. In the interview he shares, "I fantasize about myself as some sort of god. To be honest, I carried some messianic fantasies with me since childhood, which I felt I had to manage, otherwise it could lead to trouble. It's a type of illness. When one regards themselves as a sort of god, a question arises: is he as altruistic and sincere as he pretends to be? Ultimately, what are his true motivations?" Soros has never been fond of Trump. To this day, their relationship resembles a true Cold War rather than a cordial diplomatic engagement. He has articulated that nationalism poses the greatest threat to the open society he advocates. He expressed this at the World Economic Forum, which is also unsupportive of Trump, branding him the ultimate narcissist and insisting that nothing is more important than defeating him in the 2020 election. It's somewhat peculiar to label someone a narcissist when one perceives themselves as a god. The ultimate narcissism seems to lie in self-identifying as a deity. Yet, in the realm of power dynamics, to call someone narcissistic is akin to the pot calling the kettle black. After all, relative comparisons are vital in these high-stakes games. It's no wonder that Trump's rise to power did not excite him. The protests against Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, which he supported in opposition to Trump, are also memory markers in this ongoing conflict. Additionally, Trump has faced numerous accusations, including orchestrating the Capitol invasion and sexual assault, as well as tax fraud and conspiracy against the United States in his attempts to maintain power. In his defense, he has targeted Soros, suggesting that an American prosecutor would zealously pursue him, allegedly due to having been funded and influenced by Soros himself. Trump isn't Soros's only adversary. Viktor Orban, whom we previously mentioned, accuses him of wanting to inundate Hungary with migrants through NGOs financed by his foundation. In France, right-wing parties continually depict him as a speculator supporting the migration crisis and the rise of Islamism on their territory. Soros's political controversies run deep, evidenced by a suspicious package sent to him on October 22, 2018, one containing 2 explosive devices dispatched by his political opponents. As all of this unfolds, one political party appears to carry him in their hearts: the Democrats. He has been heavily involved in nearly every election since 2000. For instance, he endeavored in 2000 to aid Al Gore in defeating George Bush, albeit unsuccessfully. In 2004, he invested $12 million to undermine George Bush's re-election bid. By 2008, he backed Barack Obama, and in 2012, he remained a staunch Obama supporter. He became one of Hillary Clinton's most significant donors during her presidential campaign against Trump in 2016, spending $22 million to support Clinton and other Democratic candidates. But is this truly commendable? The millions he contributes to Clinton's campaign were driven less by a desire to support her than to thwart Trump. In 2020, he allocated $70 million to aid Biden in defeating Trump, which he successfully accomplished. His donations to the Democrats beginning in 2004 were not merely acts of generosity, but strategies aimed at thwarting Bush's election. If this weren't enough, his strategic focus extends to district attorneys as well. Approximately 20% of American prosecutors are funded by George Soros. He has invested $40 million in local elections to elect 75 progressive prosecutors over the last decade. The hundreds of millions he allocates annually to various causes have transformed from simple charitable donations into tools to serve a much more ambitious agenda. Some may wonder what the issue is, expressing concern over whom he chooses to fund. Isn't it his prerogative? He can choose to support whichever causes he wishes, and that's perfectly fine. However, that's precisely the issue. He is among those who have significantly influenced American and European politics, while avoiding the label of a politician himself. He advocates taxing the wealthy, while avoiding taxes himself, destabilizing economies to provide minimal support to the underprivileged. He professes to oppose capitalism while simultaneously decimating the Bank of England and impoverishing an entire nation to profit, all while supporting Democrats who promise to aid those in need. The irony becomes apparent when he dismisses those who dissent from his viewpoint as enemies to be marginalized or silenced. Soros seems to be advocating for a form of globalization that favors economic and political elites at the expense of local populations and cultures. In essence, he embodies the archetype of a complex villain. His philanthropic efforts and advocacy for liberal democracy mask ulterior motives that are less altruistic than they appear. His financial support of political organizations and social movements worldwide is aimed at reshaping policies and societies according to his liberal ideals. Soros yearns for an open society prioritizing education and eradicating anything that contradicts individual freedoms, particularly freedom of expression. According to Soros, if individuals do not think as he does or share his liberal ideologies, they become adversaries to be defeated. The paradox lies in his vocal criticism of tech giants like Amazon and Google and his opposition to the authoritarian use of new technologies, such as China's mass surveillance policy. Yes, his message advocates for individual freedoms and a peaceful world, yet it becomes increasingly hypocritical when he seeks to silence those who think differently from him. Additionally, he is willing to manipulate truths to bend them to his will, even impoverishing entire populations for what he deems the greater good. In reality, George Soros is a complex antagonist. Under the guise of philanthropy and the promotion of liberal democracy, his actions often serve to bolster his influence and impose his worldview. His involvement in funding political organizations and social movements worldwide aims to reshape policies and societies according to his own liberal visions. Soros envisions a form of globalization that benefits economic and political elites, while marginalizing local populations and cultures. He advocates for an open society where education takes precedence and anything that contradicts individual freedoms is eradicated, particularly freedom of expression. According to Soros, should one not think like him or share his liberal ideas, they become an enemy to be vanquished. The paradox lies in his critique of tech giants like Amazon and Google while opposing the authoritarian deployment of new technologies, such as mass surveillance in China. His ideal of an open society, which he has confined to a certain narrative, tends to overshadow genuine pluralism and political diversity. As he approaches the twilight of his life at 93 years old, one cannot help but question the legacy he will leave behind. He has a 38-year-old son named Alexander, who has made numerous visits to the Biden White House since 2021. It is quite likely that he will continue his father's mission, as George Soros' ultimate aspiration remains the realization of the open society first envisioned by Popper decades ago. In conclusion, while Soros promotes ideals that appear noble, they often come wrapped in contradictions and complexities that challenge their authenticity. His influence on politics, economics, and societal discourse raises important questions about the balance between altruism and self-interest in the quest for power and control.